I was halfway through replacing a warped fence panel when I heard the gate latch rattle. Now, for context, our backyard is fenced in, locked, and not visible from the street. No one has any business back there unless they're invited. So when I peeked around the side of the house and saw two people in cheap polos with clipboards trying to open my gate, my blood pressure spiked. "Hey," I shouted, marching over. "What do you think you're doing?" The shorter one, a woman in her mid-50s with the sort of haircut that makes you brace for a complaint, turned to me with a condescending smile. "Sir, we're with the HOA inspection committee. We received reports of an unapproved structure in your backyard." Her name tag read Tracy, and I knew exactly who she was. Tracy Whitmore, vice president of the HOA and self-appointed dictator of our neighborhood. Every month, she found a new reason to fine someone. Uncut grass, the wrong shade of beige on a mailbox, even a kid's birthday banner that stayed up one day too long. "Unapproved structure," I repeated, crossing my arms. "You mean my daughter's swing set?" "That's been up for 2 years. Tracy's clipboard partner, some guy who looked like he'd just walked out of a failed regional theater audition, cleared his throat. "We'll need to verify that it doesn't exceed the 20-foot height limit or encroach within 10 feet of the rear property line." I raised an eyebrow. "That's rich. You need to verify that by breaking into my backyard. We're authorized," Tracy said, reaching for the gate again. "You signed the HOA agreement when you moved in, remember? And that agreement doesn't give you the right to trespass," I shot back. That's when the screen door slid open behind me. My wife, Alara, stepped outside in her scrubs, fresh off a double shift at the hospital. She was exhausted, but when she saw two strangers trying to break into our backyard, her posture straightened like a switch had been flipped. "What's going on?" she asked. "They're trying to inspect our backyard," I said. "Without permission." Tracy turned her plastic smile toward Alara. "Ma'am, this is standard HOA procedure. No need to get alarmed." Alara tilted her head. "Standard procedure, you're not even wearing proper ID." She stepped forward, pulled her wallet from her back pocket, flipped it open, and held it out. "Federal Officer Alara Linton, Department of Homeland Security." The silence was instant. Tracy's face drained of color. The guy with her blinked at the badge like it might bite him. "I suggest," Alara said calmly, "that you remove yourselves from our property immediately. Or the next person you'll be explaining this to is a federal judge." Tracy took a shaky step back. "There's no need to overreact." "I'm not overreacting," Alara said. "I'm documenting." She pulled out her phone and started recording. Tracy turned so fast she nearly tripped on the sidewalk, dragging her clipboard buddy with her. I looked at Alara, stunned but impressed. "Didn't think you'd pull the badge," she shrugged. "They crossed a line, and I'm tired of Tracy's games." We had no idea just how deep those games went. But we were about to find out. 2 days after Tracy's uninvited visit, a certified envelope landed in our mailbox. Not a regular notice, not even one of those passive-aggressive pink slips the HOA like to tape to people's front doors. This was a full-on, hand-signed demand letter. Alara read it aloud while I stood at the kitchen counter with a mug of coffee that suddenly didn't taste so good. "Notice of unauthorized installation and violation of HOA bylaws," she said, flipping the page. "You are hereby instructed to remove the non-compliant structure located in your backyard within 72 hours or face escalating daily fines of up to $500. She looked up. "They're serious." I took the letter and examined the signature. "Henry Talbot, HOA President." She nodded once. "That's the name on the tax filing I pulled last month. Back when we first started getting little warnings about things we'd never been cited for: trash bins out 2 minutes too long, leaves in the gutter, a hummingbird feeder on the porch." Alara had done a quiet records check. She found the HOA's financial filings were riddled with irregularities. Reimbursements without receipts, legal fees that didn't match case filings, and administrative stipends that looked suspiciously like personal slush funds. "Let me guess," I said. "They're trying to force a confrontation. or provoke a mistake, she replied. They want us to act impulsively so they can escalate. I tapped the envelope against the counter. Well, they're not getting that. Instead, we took a quieter route. The next morning, I visited City Hall. The zoning department was in a windowless corner of the building that smelled like coffee and printer toner. A young clerk named Marcus helped me pull the original plat map for our property, along with the permits granted over the past 5 years. The swing set, I confirmed, didn't require a permit. It had been grandfathered in under a previous code change. I also got a copy of the HOA's Articles of Incorporation and their charter boundaries, which turned out to be the key. I sat in the car in the municipal parking lot, thumbing through the documents, when something caught my eye. The HOA's jurisdiction map ended 5 feet short of our backyard. Literally. Our property line extended into what the developer had originally designated as a greenbelt. That 5-foot strip had quietly reverted to private ownership when the developer's maintenance agreement expired. I checked the county assessor's site. It was ours. The HOA had no legal authority behind our rear fence. I called Alara. They're bluffing. And they've been bluffing the entire time. That night, we decided to put the whole thing on record. Alara reached out to a contact in the Office of Inspector General. Nothing formal, just a conversation. Within 48 hours, a local field agent followed up by phone. We handed over copies of the HOA's financial filings, the demand letter, and a video still of Tracy attempting to enter our yard without cause. The agent's voice didn't express much, but he asked for permission to forward the file to the state attorney's Consumer Fraud Division. A week passed. Then things got weird. One evening, I came home from work to find our security camera wiring on the west side of the house had been clipped, clean cut. No weathering, no gnaw marks, just a deliberate snip. The camera feed had gone dark the night before around 2:12 a.m. That same night, our neighbor across the street, Mr. Jensen, a retired electrician, mentioned seeing someone in a dark hoodie prowling near our side fence. I nodded but said nothing. We already had newer, hidden cameras installed after Tracy's visit, and they caught exactly what we expected. A man, roughly 6 feet tall, gloved and hooded, had entered through a side gate and walked directly to our equipment box. He used a small set of bolt cutters, disabled the feed, and left without touching anything else. We packaged the footage and turned it over to the field agent who'd contacted us earlier. Alara also filed a police report under federal property statutes, since the camera system was partially used for her work. That bumped the situation up fast. 3 days later, 2 unmarked vehicles rolled into our neighborhood just before noon. I was on the porch replacing a broken light fixture when I saw them stop in front of Tracy's house. 6 minutes later, Tracy was led out in handcuffs. The neighborhood stopped. People stared from behind curtains. One woman dropped her grocery bag in the driveway. Kids on bikes froze mid-turn. 2 officers spoke briefly with Henry Talbot, who was standing on his porch in a robe, looking like someone had just unplugged his brain. They didn't arrest him, but they did hand him a subpoena. Back at our house, I sat on the porch steps, elbows on my knees, heart pounding. I wasn't sure if I felt vindicated or quietly anxious. Either way, it was far from over. That evening, a neighbor I barely knew walked across the street. Her name was Shayna, and she lived 4 doors down in a townhouse that backed up to ours. I heard what happened, she said, brushing her hair behind one ear. You know, they tried to fine me last month for a tomato plant. I looked up. A tomato plant, she nodded. Said it was an unauthorized agricultural installation. They even sent someone into my yard to photograph it. I never gave permission. I leaned back. You willing to go on record with that? She didn't even hesitate. Definitely. By the next afternoon, we had 6 more residents come forward. Alara set up a private meeting at the community center and invited a friend from the city council to sit in. The stories poured out. Unexplained charges on HOA statements. Threats of foreclosure over unpaid dues that were never actually billed, intimidation tactics, mysterious late-night visits. And the kicker, one resident, a software engineer named Dennis, had worked briefly for the HOA's management company. He revealed that Tracy and Henry had been using a shell LLC to award themselves maintenance contracts that were never fulfilled. Tree trimming, sidewalk power washing, even non-existent pest control. Tens of thousands of dollars had been siphoned straight out of the community budget. Alara didn't speak much during the meeting. She just took notes, asked clarifying questions, and recorded statements with permission. By the end, we had enough to file a class complaint with the state attorney's office. The next morning, we did, and the fallout came fast. Henry Talbot resigned the same day the complaint went public. The HOA's board dissolved within a week after the city placed a freeze on their accounts pending investigation. Subpoenas were issued for financial records, and residents voted to transition to a voluntary maintenance association with strict oversight. As for Tracy, she was charged with trespassing, wire tampering, and misappropriation of community funds. Her trial was pending, but based on what the DA told Alara, the case was solid, our swing set, still standing. But more importantly, so was the neighborhood. The people who had once whispered complaints from behind closed doors were now talking openly. We started a neighborhood forum, not run by any official board, just a group of concerned residents who wanted transparency and fairness. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the trees and cast long shadows across the lawn, I sat with Alara on the back porch. We watched our daughter race back and forth on her swing, shrieking with laughter. Alara took a sip from her iced tea. "You think they ever thought we'd fight back?" I shook my head. "They counted on silence," she nodded. "Not anymore." 3 weeks after the board dissolved, a quiet tension settled over our neighborhood. Not the nervous kind that came with HOA violation notices taped to your door, but the kind that lingers when people are waiting for something big to land, something they know is coming, but can't quite see yet. Alara was spending her evenings cross-referencing the HOA's dissolved records with the city's property maintenance contracts. I'd never seen her so calm and focused, like she was piecing together something delicate from a scattered mess. She wasn't trying to bring down what was already crumbling, she was tracing the rot to its roots. Meanwhile, I was fixing the front porch railing when 2 unmarked sedans rolled slowly past our house. They didn't stop, but I recognized the plate series. Federal, not local, not state. And not the same ones who'd picked up Tracy. Later that night, Alara emerged from her office with a sheet of paper and a look I hadn't seen since she'd testified in a federal fraud case 3 years ago. "I found a contract signed under a name that doesn't exist," she said, setting the paper on the kitchen table. "This signature, right here, it's supposed to be the HOA's third-party grounds auditor, but I ran the EIN and the business license through the IRS database." She tapped the paper. "The company was dissolved 5 years ago, and the address listed for payment. It's a P.O. box in another county." I leaned over the document. The signature was shaky, almost like someone had traced it from another form. "So who cashed the checks?" she answered by setting a second paper beside it. This one was a copy of an altered bank statement obtained through a contact in financial crimes. The payments had been routed through an intermediary account registered to something called Community Vision Holdings. On paper, it looked like a real estate investment trust. In reality, it was a shell corporation with only 2 signatories, Henry Talbot, and a name we hadn't seen before, Lenora Haskins. "Who's that?" I asked. "She was the HOA's original treasurer," Alara said, "resigned 6 years ago. But somehow, her name's still on the account." The next morning, we made a trip to the county clerk's office and requested property deed transfers for every lot in our community that had changed hands in the last 8 years. Alara cross-referenced the names with the HOA's fine ledger, which Dennis had recovered from an unsecure backup folder weeks earlier. We found a pattern. Every homeowner who had racked up more than $5,000 in fines had either sold at a loss or defaulted. And in 4 of those cases, The properties had been quietly bought by a limited holding company for below market value, Community Vision Holdings. I sat back in the clerk's office chair and stared at the ceiling. They were bleeding people dry, forcing them to sell, then buying up their homes for pennies. Alara nodded. And once they owned enough of the lots, they could sway any vote, pass any bylaw unopposed. This wasn't just petty power trips and backdoor finds, it was real estate fraud. Predatory acquisition under the disguise of community enforcement. That night, we met with Shayna and Dennis in our garage. We didn't want to do it over messages or calls. Too risky. Alara had already detected a strange ping from our home network, a silent outbound connection at 3 in the morning, probably a tracking script sent from a corrupted HOA newsletter weeks ago. "I think it's bigger than we thought," Alara said as she laid out the documents across the workbench. They were targeting vulnerable homeowners, people who missed a payment, elderly couples without kids, anyone they thought wouldn't fight back. Shayna's jaw clenched. "They tried that with my neighbor. She got fined for a shed that was already on the property when she moved in. She was too scared to argue, sold it, and moved out last winter." Dennis added, "That's probably how they funded the extra security patrols. Remember when they brought in that outside firm to monitor the community at night?" Alara nodded. "Unlicensed. No registration with the state. They weren't guards, they were scouts." The next step was clear. We compiled a formal report and submitted it directly to the State Division of Corporate Oversight. Alara's contact elevated the case within the week, and then things escalated fast. 4 federal agents arrived at the old HOA office building, a squat, windowless structure tucked between a dental clinic and an insurance agency. They walked in mid-morning and walked out with 3 hard drives, 2 filing cabinets, and a man in his 60s handcuffed at the wrist, Lenora Haskins. Turns out she hadn't resigned at all. She'd been operating in the background, keeping her name off the board minutes but signing off on every bank transfer from the shell accounts. The real estate trust was her idea. Henry had been the face, Tracy the enforcer, but Lenora, she was the architect. The case was transferred to the U.S. Attorney's Office. Federal wire fraud, mail fraud, and racketeering charges were filed within 10 days. The community was stunned. Half the neighborhood didn't even know who Lenora was. She hadn't attended a meeting in years, but the records spoke for her. In her deposition, she admitted to forging signatures on official documents, setting up proxy votes using the names of deceased homeowners, and rerouting maintenance funds into private accounts. What she didn't expect was the audio recording. Dennis had found it on a corrupted backup drive. A phone conversation between Lenora and Henry, discussing how to lean on the hospital lady and her husband before they start sniffing around too deep. We turned that over as well. By mid-May, the federal case had enough evidence to proceed to a grand jury. The charges were read in open court, and the story made its way to local media. People who had once shrugged off HOA complaints as nuisances were now seeing it for what it was: organized theft under the guise of neighborhood improvement. At the next community meeting organized by residents, not any bored Alara stood up and addressed the room. "None of this would have come to light if they hadn't gotten greedy," she said. "They thought no one would look past the surface. That no one would ask who actually benefits from the rules they enforce." A retired school principal raised her hand. "What happens now? We rebuild," Alara said. "No boards, no secret votes, everything transparent. And if anyone ever tries to pull something like this again, we'll be ready." That night, I walked the perimeter of our backyard and checked the newly installed motion lights. Every side lit up instantly. I paused at the swing set, watching the wind gently sway the seat. This had started with a fence panel and 2 clipboard-wielding trespassers. But it ended with a community no longer afraid to ask questions, and not one of them would ever let an HOA control them again. The morning after the federal charges were filed, a plain white envelope was slid under our door sometime between sunrise and Alara's first cup of coffee. No stamp, No postmark, just our address scrawled in block letters across the front. Inside was a single sheet of printer paper. 4 words, typed in bold: "You should have stayed quiet." I didn't say anything right away. I just turned it over, checked for fingerprints, then slid it into a Ziploc bag. Alara had barely sipped her coffee, but she could read my posture like an open file cabinet. "What is it now?" she asked, setting her mug down. I handed her the bag. She read it once, then again, expression flat. "They're still trying to play games." "Think it's someone from the HOA leftovers?" She shook her head. "No, this feels less like intimidation and more like desperation. Someone who's still exposed and knows it." There were still names we hadn't traced fully. A few lower-level enforcers who'd acted as compliance officers under the fake bylaws. Most of them had vanished the day the subpoenas went out. But one name kept coming up in resident statements: Donnie Vell, a former property manager who'd bounced between neighborhoods like a conman on a circuit, always just inside the lines of legality. According to Dennis, Donnie had been the one who originally recruited Tracy for the vice president position. He had a reputation for turning quiet cul-de-sacs into money machines and walking away once the coffers were dry. We hadn't found any direct ties between him and the shell accounts until now. Alara pulled up the community maintenance logs, which we'd archived after the HOA office was seized. She scrolled through the contractor sign-ins until she landed on a recurring entry: DV Holdings Property Oversight and Safety. The initials were too neat to be a coincidence. "I'm going to need to call in one more favor," she said. By that evening, we had a meeting scheduled with an assistant U.S. attorney named Calderon. Alara had worked parallel to her on a smuggling case in Baltimore years ago. Now, she was heading up a task force on financial abuse in residential communities. We met her in a secure conference room at the federal building where the lighting was too bright and the air too cold. Calderon was already reviewing the maintenance logs when we walked in. "Your guy, Donnie," she said, flipping a page. "We've had his name on a fraud list since he filed a fake permit to build a retention pond in a subdivision that didn't exist. But we never had enough to tie him to a broader conspiracy." Alara handed her the envelope. "He's still active. And now he's nervous." Calderon slid the Ziploc into an evidence sleeve. "Then he's about to have a very bad week." Over the next 3 days, subpoenas were issued for every document signed under DV Holdings across 3 counties. What came back told the rest of the story. Donnie had been setting up straw companies registered to dead addresses and using them to bill neighborhoods for phantom services, tree removal, alarm system upgrades, even rodent control in communities without a single documented infestation. The HOA in our neighborhood had been his most lucrative contract. Tracy and Henry approved every invoice without oversight. Lenora, as treasurer, had routed the payments through her own funneling system and issued kickbacks in quarterly disbursements labeled as community bonuses. But Donnie had made one mistake. He'd used the same false contractor license number on 6 different invoices across county lines. That triggered a federal jurisdictional overlap. By the end of the week, he was picked up at a rental condo 2 towns over. The agents who brought him in found 5 prepaid phones, 7 burner email accounts, and a stack of signed blank checks addressed to dissolved HOA boards across the state. With Donnie in custody, the rest unraveled fast. He flipped before the end of his first interview, offering up detailed logs of every payment issued under DV Holdings, including the names of 2 more board members who had quietly resigned just before the investigation started. Calderon's team traced an additional $87,000 in unreported income across joint accounts tied to them. 18 indictments were handed down in a single day. The story broke on every local news station that week. Reporters swarmed the neighborhood, setting up cameras outside the now closed HOA office. The headline scrolled across the screen like a punch to the gut: Widespread HOA fraud scheme exposed multiple arrests in multi-state investigation. Our neighborhood stopped being a cautionary tale and became a case study. The city council held a public forum to address the scandal. Alara was invited to speak, but she declined. Instead, she nominated Shayna and Dennis to represent the residents. They'd been there from the beginning, helping us connect the dots when the picture was still blurry. Dennis stood before the council with a manila folder full of pages, but he didn't need to open it. "All we wanted was to live in peace," he said. "They turned our homes into ledgers. We were lines on a profit sheet." That ends now. The council voted unanimously to impose new oversight requirements on all HOA boards operating within city limits. Monthly financial disclosures became mandatory. Board elections were to be monitored by an independent auditor. And most importantly, any enforcement officer operating under an HOA title had to be registered with the city and carry legal identification at all times. The fake inspectors were officially outlawed. Weeks passed. The lawns grew a little taller. Trash cans lingered by the curb a little longer. But the people? They looked each other in the eye again. We weren't just neighbors anymore, we were survivors of a silent war no one had realized was being waged until someone pushed back. Alara and I finally took a weekend off. We drove out to the coast, left our phones in the glove box, and walked along the shoreline with our daughter, who had no idea how close her swing set had come to being the first domino. When we returned, the neighborhood felt lighter. There were no more envelopes under doors. No more anonymous notes about paint colors or lawn heights, just porch lights coming on at dusk and kids riding bikes in the street. The following month, a new sign went up at the entrance to the community. Nothing corporate, nothing glossy. Just a wooden post with a hand-painted message. "Welcome to Meadowgate, no boards, just neighbors." One afternoon, I found myself on the porch again, watching a kid from 3 houses down help an older couple carry groceries up their steps. A small thing. But it hadn't happened before, not like that. Lara stepped out, holding 2 glasses of lemonade. "Think we're done?" I asked. She passed me a glass. "We're never done, but we're ahead." We sat in the quiet, no clipboards, no declarations, no threats, just a swing set still standing. And a community that had remembered how to stand with it.